He is breathing. Do not touch him. Beatrice, do not touch him. For heaven's sake, you will make it worse and it will be blamed on us. Nathaniel Craymore heard those words through a red haze of pain, lying in the wet grass beside the wreck of his overturned carriage, and they were the first words in some time to reach him whole, and so he remembered them. The accident had been nobody's fault, or everybody's. A wheel gone into a rut on the bad stretch of road below Craymore Hill, a lurch, a scream from one of the horses, and then the whole world turning over, the crack of splintering wood. The carriage on its side in the ditch, and Nathaniel flung clear into the sodden meadow, with a blow to the head that had emptied the world of everything for a space he could not measure. When it came back in pieces. Grey sky. Wet cold soaking up through his coat. A ringing in his skull like a struck bell. The distant frantic stamping of the horses. And voices coming nearer through the ringing, 2 women's voices, and he knew them both. He did not open his eyes. Afterward he would not be able to say precisely why. Some instinct older than thought, perhaps the soldier's trick of playing dead among the fallen, though Nathaniel had never been a soldier. Or simply that his head hurt too savagely to lift, and his limbs would not yet answer him, and it was easier, in that first swimming moment, to lie still and let the world reassemble itself before he tried to move in it. Whatever the reason, he lay still, his eyes shut, his breath shallow, and he did not let them know that he had come back to himself. And so the Duke of Craymore overheard the thing that changed the whole course of his life. The first voice, the one that had spoken of blame, was Lady Vivien Ashcroft's. He would have known it anywhere. It was a beautiful voice, cool and clear and perfectly modulated, the voice of a woman who had been the reigning beauty of 3 seasons and had accepted 6 weeks ago, in a triumph reported in every drawing-room the kingdom, the hand of the Duke of Craymore. She was to be his wife. The wedding was set for the spring. She was, by universal agreement, the most brilliant match in England, and Nathaniel, who had chosen her with his head rather than his heart. Judging that a great house wanted a great mistress, and that a man of 35 could not expect to find both grandeur and love in one woman, had congratulated himself on a sensible, advantageous, entirely rational engagement. He listened to his brilliant, advantageous fiancée now lying broken in a ditch 6 feet from her, and what he heard turned him to stone. Cannot possibly be seen to have anything to do with it, Lady Vivien was saying, and her cool voice had an edge of real vexation in it, but no fear, no grief, nothing that a woman might feel to see the man she loved thrown senseless into the wet. If he dies here, Beatrice, do you understand what that means, do you? The settlements are signed, but we are not yet married. If he dies now, I am nothing, a jilted bride, near enough, a girl who lost a duke to a carriage wheel. I get nothing. Not the title, not Craymore, not a farthing of the fortune. 6 weeks from the altar and I am back to being merely Lady Vivien Ashcroft with a dwindling portion and every cat in London whispering that I could not even keep a Maeve alive long enough to marry him. A sharp, disgusted breath. It would be exactly my luck. I have worked 3 years for this. 3 years of simpering at that cold, dull, humourless man and pretending to care for his tedious opinions and his dreary estate, and now this. Nathaniel did not move. It cost him everything not to move. Vivien. The second voice was different, lower, warmer, and steadier, though it too was shaking, but shaking with a different thing. It was the voice of Miss Beatrice Hale, Lady Vivien's poor cousin, who lived on the Ashcrofts' charity and served, so far as Nathaniel had ever noticed her at all, as a sort of unpaid companion, fetcher of shawls, and general convenience. He had scarcely exchanged a dozen words with her in 6 weeks. She was a quiet, plain, brownish sort of young woman who kept to the edges of rooms, and Nathaniel, absorbed in the brilliant Lady Vivien, had let his eye pass over her 100 times as one passes over the furniture. Vivien, he is hurt. He is badly hurt. His head is bleeding. This is not, we cannot stand here talking of settlements while a man lies senseless in the cold. We must get help. We must get him warm. Where is the coachman? Is he hurt too? Oh God, everyone is hurt. We must. Do stop panicking, it is very tiresome. Lady Vivien again, cool as glass. The coachman has gone to the farm for men and a cart. He was perfectly able to walk, I saw him. As for Craymore, a pause, and Nathaniel, listening, heard something in that pause he remembered to the end of his days. As for Craymore, we shall simply have to see, shan't we? If he lives, we marry in the spring and all is well, and I am a duchess, and this is a horrid story I shall tell prettily at dinners. If he dies, the voice did not so much as tremble, then I shall grieve most beautifully, and wear black most becomingly, and everyone will be terribly sorry for me, and I shall look about for the next one. There is always a next one, Beatrice. That is the one lesson I have learned, and it is the only one worth knowing. There was a silence. You do not mean that, said Beatrice Hale very low. You cannot mean it. Whatever you feel for him, or do not feel, he is a living man, Vivien, lying in the wet, and he trusted you enough to make you his wife, and you are standing over him weighing whether it profits you more to have him live or die. I have known you all my life, and I did not want to think. Her voice broke off. When it came again it was steadier, and there was something in it, some quiet iron, that Nathaniel had never heard from the shawl fetcher at the edges of rooms. Go, then. Go and stand by the road where it is dry, and wait to see whether you are to be a duchess or a widow before the wedding. I will stay with him. Somebody in this world ought to stay with him who is not counting his money. You always were sentimental, said Lady Vivien, unbothered. It is why you have nothing and never will. Suit yourself. Get your gown muddy over him if it pleases you. I am going to the road. I cannot be seen kneeling in a ditch. It looks desperate. And Nathaniel heard the swish of expensive skirts moving away over the wet grass, unhurried, toward the dry verge, away from the man she was to marry. He lay very still, his eyes shut, his head roaring, and felt the whole rational, advantageous, sensible edifice of his life crack straight across. Then a soft weight settled beside him in the wet grass, a knee, a rustle of plain muslin gone at once sodden and cold, for Beatrice Hale had knelt right down in the ditch beside him, careless of her gown, and a hand, small and cold and trembling, touched his face. Your Grace, very low. Only for him, though she could not know he heard. Your Grace, if you can hear me at all, help is coming. The coachman has gone for men. They will not be long, you must only hold on. Do you hear me? You must hold on. Her cold fingers found the pulse at his throat, checked it, and he felt her breath catch in relief at the beating of it. There it is, strong. You are strong. Whatever else you are, and I do not know you, Your Grace, not really, no one is let near enough to know you. You are strong, and you are alive, and I am not going anywhere. I am right here. I will stay until they come. You are not alone in this cold. You are not. And Beatrice Hale, the poor cousin, the fetcher of shawls, the furniture at the edge of the room, did a thing that no one in Nathaniel Craymore's careful, guarded, coldly rational life had done in longer than he could remember. She took off her own shawl, thin, worn, her one shawl, in the November cold, and she laid it over him, tucking it close about his shoulders with those cold, trembling hands, giving him the only warmth she had. And then she took his cold hand in both of hers and held it, and began, very softly, so that he might not be alone in the dark, to talk to him. Of nothing, of the coming help, of the grey sky clearing to the west, of holding on, the way one talks to hold a frightened creature in the world. Nathaniel Craymore lay with his eyes shut, and let her believe him senseless, and felt the tears leak hot from beneath his closed lids into the cold, wet grass, and knew with a certainty beyond all argument that he had very married the wrong woman entirely, and that the right one had been at the edge of the room the whole time, fetching the shawls. And he had never once looked. The men came with a cart, and Nathaniel let himself be roused, groaning, blinking, playing the part of a man swimming up from unconsciousness, which was not hard, for his head was in truth a ruin. He let them lift him. He let the physician be sent for. He let Lady Vivien sweep back from the dry verge to the moment of his waking and arrange her lovely face into a mask of tender, relieved distress. Oh, Nathaniel, thank God, I have been half out of my mind. And he let her take his hand and press it, and he looked up into the beautiful, cool, calculating face of the woman he was to marry, and he said, in a voice thick with the pain that was quite real, "You are too good to me, Vivien. I do not deserve such devotion." He watched her believe it. He watched her preen faintly at her own performance. She had no idea. She had knelt in his hearing and weighed his death against her prospects and found them nicely balanced, and she had no idea on earth that he had heard a word of it. And she smiled her beautiful smile and told him to rest. that all would be well, that she would nurse him herself. She would not. Of course, she found sick rooms tedious and said so within the hour to a servant, though Nathaniel only learned that later. And over her shoulder, hanging back, muddy to the knees, her thin arms bare and goose-fleshed in the cold, because her only shawl was even now tucked about the Duke's shoulders, stood Beatrice Hale. She was not looking to be thanked. That was the thing that undid him, watching through half-shut eyes. She had shrunk back to the edge the moment the others came, resumed her place as the furniture, and she was watching him only to be sure he lived. And when she saw that he did, when she saw him wake and speak and take his fiancée's hand, something eased in her plain grave face. And she gave a small private nod, as one who has done what was needed and asks nothing for it, and stepped back further, and made herself small, and no one but Nathaniel marked that she was shivering. He said nothing. Not then. He was borne home to Craymore on a hurdle, and a physician bound his head and bled him and ordered him to bed, and to quiet for a fortnight, and Nathaniel obeyed, outwardly. Inwardly he lay in the great bed in the great house he had meant to fill with the brilliant Lady Vivien, and he thought hour upon hour, more clearly than he had thought in years, precisely how blind a rational man could be, for he saw it all now, laid out plain. He had chosen Lady Vivien with his head. He had told himself that a great duke wanted a great duchess, an ornament, a hostess, a beauty to grace the head of his table and dazzle the county, and that love was a thing for lesser men who could not afford grandeur. He had congratulated himself on his sense, and he had been, he saw now, the most sentimental fool of all, for he had believed the surface of a thing was the thing. He had bought the glittering casket and never once asked what was in it, and what was in it, he now knew, was a woman who could kneel over his dying body and calculate her losses without a tremor. Beatrice Hale he had not bought, and not chosen, and not even truly seen. And Beatrice Hale had knelt in a ditch in November, and given a near stranger her only shawl, and held his cold hand, and talked him softly through the dark, asking nothing, expecting nothing, because he understood this too now, with a sick clarity, because it was simply what she was. All the way through, the way Lady Vivien was calculation all the way through, he had spent 6 weeks courting the casket. The jewel had been fetching the shawls. He did not rush. Nathaniel Craymore did nothing in haste. It was one of the few of his old habits the accident had left intact. But he began from his sickbed to watch. He watched over the fortnight of his convalescence, how the two women moved through his house, for Lady Vivien, her mother and Miss Hale were all three staying at Craymore now, the engagement being what it was, the wedding being close. And what he saw only confirmed and deepened everything the ditch had taught him. He watched Lady Vivien be charming to him and cold to the servants, watched her order Beatrice about like a maid. "Fetch my scent, cousin. Find my letters, cousin. I cannot think why you are so slow, cousin," in a sweet-carrying voice with cruelty threaded fine through the sweetness. He watched her spend an hour describing to her mother the redecoration she meant to inflict on Craymore once she was its mistress, the good old rooms she would gut, the ancestral things she found dreary, and he thought of how Beatrice, sent up with his broth, had stopped in the doorway of the old library and looked at the shelves with a soft, unguarded hunger and said, "Oh, what a beautiful room. You must be very happy, your grace, to have so many books to grow old among," and had gone pink and hurried out, as though she had said too much. He watched, and he mended, and he made his plans, and he did one thing more. He set himself quietly from his sickbed to learn the woman he had never troubled to see. It was not difficult. She came to him twice daily with his broth and his physic, sent by Lady Vivien, who found sick rooms tedious. And Nathaniel, who had built his life on a cool reserve that kept everyone at arm's length, deliberately, and then not deliberately at all, to talk to her. He learned that Beatrice Hale was 25, that she had been orphaned at 15 and taken in by her Aunt Ashcroft, who never let her forget the charity of it, that she had spent 10 years as the family's convenience, its shawl fetcher and letter finder and general unpaid hand, and had made herself so useful and so uncomplaining that no one now imagined she might want a life of her own. He learned that she read everything she could lay hands on in stolen hours, and had opinions on all of it that came out shy, and then fierce once she forgot to be careful. He learned that she loved the country and growing things, and had a passion for the tending of a garden that she had never once in her life had a garden to indulge. He learned she had a low, sudden, helpless laugh that she smothered the instant it escaped, as though laughter too were a charity she had no right to. He learned, in short, that she was everything he had told himself a duke could not afford to marry for warmth and wit and a true good heart, and that he had passed her over 100 times because she did not glitter, and Nathaniel Craymore, lying in his bed watching his plain grave nurse smother her laughter, fell so quietly and so completely in love with her that he did not even notice the moment it was done. Only woke one morning to find it had been true for some time. The difficulty was that he was engaged to her cousin, and that the engagement was in 6 weeks, and that he could not, being the man he was, simply break it in a manner that would ruin Lady Vivien before the world, whatever she deserved. For scandal falls hardest on women, and even a false and heartless woman did not deserve to be publicly destroyed, and more to the point, Beatrice would never accept happiness bought at the price of her cousin's disgrace. He knew her well enough already to know that, so he thought, and he watched. And he waited for the thing he needed, which was for Lady Vivien to show her true nature, not to a man she believed senseless in a ditch, but to the man himself, awake and well and worth marrying, so that the breaking of the engagement should be seen by all the world to be her doing and not his, so that he might turn from the false to the true without staining the true with the manner of it. And so he set himself to be patient, and to mend, and, in the quiet, firelit hours of his, those were strange, quiet days, the days of his convalescence, and Nathaniel came afterward to think of them as the truest of his life. By the 5th day he was well enough to sit up, and to be moved, at his own insistence, from the sick-room to a great chair by the fire in the old library, the room Beatrice had called beautiful, with a rug over his knees and his aching head propped, and orders from the physician to do nothing at all. He did nothing at all with great attention. He watched the door. She came at 11 with his broth, as she came every morning, sent by a cousin who found sick-rooms tedious. And on the 5th day, instead of thanking her and dismissing her as a duke dismisses a servant, Nathaniel said, "Miss Hale, will you sit a moment? I am forbidden to read and forbidden to work and forbidden, in short, to do anything but stare at the fire, and I find I am going quietly out of my mind for want of a rational voice. Yours, I have observed, is uncommonly rational. Sit, talk to me. I order it. If that makes it easier, you may tell your cousin the Duke commanded it and could not be gainsaid." She had hesitated, poised in the doorway like a creature deciding whether to flee. Then something, the fire, perhaps, or the plain human weariness in his voice, or the memory neither of them had spoken of a hand held in a ditch, had made her set down the tray and perch, warily, on the very edge of the chair opposite, her hands folded, ready to bolt. They talked. Or rather Nathaniel asked, and drew her out with the patience of a man who has decided, quite suddenly, that there is nothing in the world he would rather learn than one particular woman. He learned her that week, hour by stolen hour, in the firelit library. He learned it slowly, because she gave nothing easily. 10 years of being overlooked had taught her to expect that any interest shown in her was a prelude to being asked for something, and she kept waiting for the request that did not come. "You are looking at that shelf again," he observed on the 7th day. "You have looked at it 3 times. Which book is it that you want?" Beatrice coloured. "I do not want anything, Your Grace." "That," said Nathaniel, "is the least true thing you have said all week, and you have been at some pains to say very little." "Which book?" She looked at him, and looked at the shelf, and some small dam gave way. "The one in the green binding," she admitted. "The Travels. I read a little of it once, years ago, at a house we visited. I was not meant to. I was meant to be minding my aunt's fan, but I took it into a window for an hour, and I have thought about it ever since. I never learned how it ended. Whether he came home." She said it, and then looked mortified, as though she had confessed to theft. Nathaniel rang for a footman and had the green book brought down and put it into her hands, and closed her fingers over it and said, "It is yours. No, do not give it back, and do not tell me you cannot accept it. It is a book, Beatrice, not a diamond, and I have 400 of them and read perhaps a dozen. He does come home, by the way. But you must read it and see how. I should like to know your opinion of the manner of it. You will bring it to me when you have finished, and we shall argue about it. I have no doubt we shall disagree entirely. You have a disagreeing sort of face." She had laughed then. The low, sudden, helpless laugh, escaping before she could smother it, and clapped her hand over mouth, and Nathaniel had felt something turn over in his chest that had nothing to do with the blow to his head. "You must stop doing that," he said. "Doing what, Your Grace?" "Catching your own laughter as though it were a thing you had stolen. It is the most disagreeable habit. You did it in the ditch too, I think." "No, you did not laugh in the ditch. There was nothing to laugh at in the ditch. But you have the air, always, of a person apologizing for taking up room in the world. I have watched you do it for 6 weeks. I did not understand before what I was watching. I understand now." He held her startled eyes. "You need not apologize to me for taking up room, Beatrice. I find I like the room you take up better than any I have known. Laugh as loud as you please. There is no one here to fetch a fan for." She had not known what to say to that, and had bent her head over the green book, and he had watched the firelight in her plain brown hair, and thought that he had spent his whole life among glittering people and had never once, until this week, been in the presence of anything he would call lovely. It went on like that. She brought him the book 2 days later, having sat up half the night to finish it, and they argued about the ending exactly as he had promised, fiercely, she forgetting entirely to be careful, her eyes bright, her whole grave face come alight, and then remembering herself, and going quiet, and Nathaniel gently coaxing her back out again. He learned that she had a fierce, quick mind under the meekness, and a great, starved capacity for joy under the caution, and a goodness so woven into the grain of her that she did not even know it was remarkable, believing kindness to be merely the rent one paid for a seat at another family's table. And he learned precisely how his life had gone wrong. He had believed, in his careful, rational way, that a man of his rank must marry grandly and love, if at all, elsewhere and later. That warmth and joy and a true companion were luxuries a great house could not afford at its head. He saw now that he had had it exactly backward, the grandeur he could buy anywhere. The thing sitting across from him in the firelight, arguing about a book with her whole heart, was the only thing in the world that could not be bought at all, and he had passed it 100 times because it wore no jewels. He said nothing of this to her. It was not yet the time. He was still bound in law and honor to her cousin, and until that was undone by Vivien's own hand he would not speak a word to Beatrice that a betrothed man had no right to speak. But he made her one promise on the last evening before he was well enough to leave the library and the private world it had held. "When I am recovered," he said, as she rose to take the tray, "and this house is settled and certain matters are resolved that I cannot yet explain to you, I mean to have a garden made here. The old walled garden by the south front has run to ruin. No one has tended it in 30 years. I mean to have it restored." He looked at her. "I shall want someone to oversee it. Someone who understands growing things, and has waited a long time for a garden of her own to tend, and would love it as a thing and not merely spend money on it. I do not suppose you would know of such a person." Beatrice went very still, the tray in her hands, and looked at him, and he watched her not quite dare to understand him, and watched her decide it was safer not to. "I am sure Lady Vivien will engage a very good gardener, Your Grace," she said quietly, and carried out the tray. Nathaniel watched the door close behind her and smiled alone into the fire and thought, soon he had only to wait for the false woman to unmask herself before witnesses, and a woman like Vivien, he knew, could no more keep her true self hidden forever than a fire can keep from smoking. He had only to give her rope and wait. He did not have to wait long. The occasion came a week later, when Nathaniel was up from his bed at last, still pale, still walking with a care he did not entirely feign, and a company of neighbours had been asked to dine at Craymore. First entertainment since the accident, a small glittering evening got up largely, so that Lady Vivien might play at being the great house mistress before the county that would soon call her so. He gave her the rope she needed. He did it quietly, over the long candlelit dinner, by seeming to raise, as if idly, the very subject on which he knew her heart was set. "I have been thinking, Vivien," he said, in the hearing of the table, "that the old library ought not to be touched, after all. It was my grandfather's great work. And Miss Hale said a thing about it the other day that has stayed with me, that it was a beautiful room to grow old among. I found I agreed with her. I believe I shall leave the old rooms of Craymore exactly as they are." He let a small pause fall. "You are not disappointed, I hope?" I know you had schemes for the place. He watched Lady Vivian's lovely face. He had judged her rightly. She could not bear it, could not bear to be crossed in her plans, could not bear that the crossing came dressed in praise of Beatrice, could not bear, above all, that the plain poor cousin's chance remark should be quoted at her own dinner table as wiser than her own grand design. And she had drunk 2 glasses of the good Craymore wine, and she was flushed with playing the Duchess before the county, and she forgot, for one fatal moment, as such women eventually always do, to keep the beautiful cool mask fixed in place. "Oh, Beatrice's remark," she said, with a little laugh that had a great deal of contempt in it and a great deal of wine. "How charming, that you should build the future of Craymore upon poor Beatrice's remarks. She has so few and lives so entirely upon our kindness, that I suppose we ought to treasure the ones she does produce." A titter went round the near end of the table. Her mother's face tightened. Vivien, encouraged, went on, warming to the cruelty as to a fire. "You must not mind my cousin's little enthusiasms, Nathaniel. She is a dear creature, but she has no more notion of how a great house should be conducted than my maid has. Less, for at least my maid knows her place, and does not sit at the table above it. Really, it is too absurd to be lectured on my own future drawing-rooms by a girl who has never in her life owned so much as the shawl on her back." She smiled her brilliant smile round the table, inviting them all to share the joke, and lifted her glass. "But then that is the trouble with taking in a poor relation out of charity, is it not? Give them a seat at the table for a fortnight, and they begin to fancy they belong at it." The table had gone very quiet. Beatrice Hale had gone white. She sat perfectly still at her end of the board, her eyes on her plate, her hands folded in her lap, absorbing the blow in silence before the whole company as she had absorbed 1,000 smaller ones over 10 years, making herself small, making no scene, giving her cousin nothing. And Nathaniel Craymore set down his glass and rose. He rose slowly, for his head still pained him, and the movement drew every eye at the table, and the room fell wholly silent, the way rooms had always fallen silent for the Duke of Craymore, cold and reserved and never to be crossed. "I find," he said, in a voice pleasant and level and terrible, "that I have a thing to say, and that it will not keep. You must all forgive me. I am lately recovered from a blow to the head, and I am told such blows sometimes leave a man strangely honest. I find it is so. I have been honest with myself for a fort now, lying upstairs, and I find I can no longer be otherwise at my own table." He looked down the length of it, at his beautiful, brilliant, faithless fiancée, Vivien. "When my carriage overturned 3 weeks ago, I was thrown into the ditch by the road, and I lay there for some little while unable to move or to speak, but not, as it happened, unable to hear." He watched the colour drain from Lady Vivian's face. He watched her understand all at once, in a single sickening instant, exactly what was coming and be unable to stop it, and have no notion how much he had heard. "I heard a great deal that afternoon in the ditch," Nathaniel went on, quiet, relentless, merciful only in that he named no more than he must. "I heard my betrothed stand over my body and reckon aloud, without a tremor, whether it profited her more that I should live or die. I heard her count the settlements and calculate her losses and decide that if I died she would grieve most becomingly and look about for the next one, there being, as she observed, always a next one. I heard her call me cold and dull and humourless, and confess that 3 years of her devotion had been 3 years of simpering at a man she could not endure, for the sake of my title and my house and my fortune." A gasp went round the table. Lady Vivian's mother had risen halfway from her chair. Nathaniel did not raise his voice. "I do not tell you this to shame you, Vivien, though I perceive it shames you, and I am sorry for it. I tell you because a man who has heard those things cannot marry the woman who said them, and cannot let the world think the fault his, and cannot, above all, let another word be spoken at this table against the only person in that ditch who behaved like a Christian." He turned. And now his voice changed entirely. "For while my brilliant betrothed stood on the dry verge composing her morning face," he said, "there was another woman in that ditch. There was a woman who knelt down in the November mud, without a thought for her gown, and took off her one thin shawl in the cold, and laid it over a man she barely knew and believed to be dying, and took his cold hand in both of hers, and talked to him softly, so that he should not be alone in the dark, asking nothing, expecting nothing, because it was simply what she is. All the way through, He looked at Beatrice Hale, who had lifted her white, astonished face from her plate, and was staring at him as though he had begun to speak in a tongue she did not dare understand. The woman you have all been taught to overlook. The woman who lives, you tell me, entirely upon your kindness, when the truth, which I heard with my own ears in that ditch, is that she is the only one among you who has ever shown any. She gave a dying stranger the shawl off her back, Vivien, while you would not so much as kneel in the mud beside him for fear it should look desperate. I have been 3 weeks deciding which of you I have the honor to love. It was not, in the end, a difficult decision. It only wanted a broken head to make me see what any fool with a heart should have seen in a week. The table sat in stunned, breathless silence. Lady Vivien had gone from white to a mottled scarlet. She opened her beautiful mouth. Nothing came. There was, in truth, nothing that could come. She had said every word he named and worse. She had said it believing him dead or dying, and she could not deny it, for she saw in his face that he had heard, and she saw in the faces round the table that they believed him, that of course they believed him. For it was only what the sharpest of them had always suspected of her, and they were even now composing the letters they would write about it before the week was out. The brilliant Lady Vivien Ashcroft, jilted at her own triumph, unmasked before the county, undone by her own cold tongue over a man she had thought safely senseless in a ditch. She saw the whole ruin of it in an instant, and there was nothing whatever to be done, and she rose from the table in a rustle of expensive silk with what little was left of her dignity and swept from the room, her stricken mother hurrying after, and she did not come back. Nathaniel let them go. Scandal enough would follow her, he need add none. He had done only what he must, turn the fault to its true owner before witnesses, so that no one could ever say the Duke of Craymore had thrown over a faithful woman for a poor cousin. He had freed himself cleanly. The rest he could leave to the county's tongues, which needed no help from him. Then he turned, in the ringing quiet, to Beatrice Hale. She was still sitting at the foot of the table, quite white, her hands pressed together in her lap, and she was trembling, not with the old shrinking fear he saw, but with something too large to hold. And when she found her voice it came out barely above a whisper, and there was in it none of the triumph another woman might have felt, only a kind of stricken tenderness and a disbelief so total it hurt to see. "Your Grace," she said, "you heard me, in the ditch. All that while you were awake, and you heard me, and you let me believe." She pressed a hand to her mouth. "I said such foolish things. I talked to you of the sky clearing and of holding on, only to fill the silence, only so you should not be alone. I never dreamed. Oh, and your shawl, my shawl." A broken half-laugh, half-sob escaped her. "You have carried that about with you all this while, knowing." "I have carried it about with me all this while, knowing," Nathaniel agreed. He came down the length of the table to her, slowly, and the last of the guests, taking the hint at last, gathered themselves and murmured and withdrew, until the two of them were alone in the great candlelit room with the wreck of the dinner and the whole changed world between them. "I heard every word, Beatrice, and they were not foolish. They were the only good and human words spoken in that whole cold field. You knelt in the mud and gave a stranger your only warmth and held his hand and would not leave him, and you did it believing no one would ever know, which is the only kind of goodness that counts for anything at all." He stopped before her and looked down at her plain, grave, upturned face, streaked now with the tears she had never let fall for herself in 10 years of being overlooked. "I have spent 3 weeks lying upstairs falling in love with the woman I found in that ditch. I courted a casket and passed the jewel 100 times because it did not glitter. I am not a man who admits to being a fool. I am admitting it now. I was a fool, Beatrice Hale, for 6 weeks and very nearly for the rest of my life, and you saved me from it, without ever meaning to, by simply being what you are while you thought no one was looking." Beatrice stared up at him. Tears ran freely now, and she did not check them. "I have nothing," she whispered. "You know it better than anyone. You heard it thrown at me not 10 minutes gone. No fortune, no name, no shawl even, that is not now yours. I am the poor cousin." "Dukes do not, your Grace. You cannot mean, people will say you have run mad, that the blow to your head. Let them say it." Nathaniel reached down and took both her cold hands in his, as she had once taken his in a ditch in the rain, and drew her gently to her feet before him. "I have spent 35 years being sensible, Beatrice, and rational, and cold, and it brought me within 6 weeks of marrying a woman who would have watched me die and reckoned her losses. I am done being sensible. I have found, lying in a ditch and then in a sickbed, that the only thing on this earth worth having is exactly the thing I was too clever to look for: a true heart, and a warm one, and a good one, and it has been at the edge of my rooms fetching the shawls this whole while, and I did not see it, and now I see nothing else." His voice dropped, rough and low and wholly in earnest. "I do not want a duchess to glitter at the head of my table. I want the woman who took off her own shawl in the cold. Marry me, Beatrice Hale. Not out of gratitude. I do not want your gratitude any more than you wanted mine. Marry me because I love you, and because I have every reason to believe, if I am patient, that you might learn to love me, the real man, the one you talked to in the dark before you knew he could hear, the one no one is ever let near enough to know. Let me be known, by you, only ever by you. And I will spend the rest of my life making certain you never again own nothing, and are never again overlooked, and never once, so long as we both draw breath, have to smother your laughter as though we're a charity you had no right to." For a long moment Beatrice Hale could not answer. She looked up at the tall grave man holding her hands, the cold, feared, reserved Duke of Craymore, whom no one was let near enough to know, and who was letting her near, all the way near, his whole undefended heart in his eyes, and something 10 years frozen and broke open at last. "I loved you in the ditch," she said, wonderingly, through her tears. "I did not let myself know it, because it was not a thing a girl like me is allowed to feel about a man like you. But I knelt in that mud and held your hand and thought, if he dies, if he only dies, no one will ever have loved of him properly, no one is ever let close enough. And it broke my heart, your grace, it broke my heart to think of you dying uncherished. And I did not understand until this moment that the reason it broke my heart was that she could not finish it. She did not need to." "Yes," she said instead, and laughed, that low, sudden, helpless laugh, and let it ring out this time, unsmothered, for the first time in her life. "Yes, God help us both, yes." And Nathaniel Craymore drew the poor cousin who owned nothing into his arms in the candlelit ruin of the dinner, and held her against the heart she had warmed in a cold ditch when she thought no one would ever know, and kissed her tenderly like a man who has been given, past all deserving, the one true thing he almost threw away. They were married in the spring, quietly, in the old chapel at Craymore, with the county's tongues still busy over the fall of Lady Vivien, who had gone abroad and would in time make a lesser match to a man who never learned, until it was too late, exactly what he had got. Nathaniel did not think of her often. A man does not linger over the casket once he has found the jewel. He thought instead, in the long warm years that followed, as Craymore filled with light and books and the sound of small feet on the old stairs, and the neglected garden bloomed at last under the hands of a mistress who had waited a lifetime to tend one, and the servants grew used to the astonishing sound of their cold master's laughter answering his wife's. He thought instead of a grey afternoon in a ditch below Craymore Hill, and a blow to the head, and a woman kneeling in the mud. He had feigned unconsciousness that day for no reason he could name, some instinct, some accident of pain. And it had shown him the truth 2 women could not have shown him in 100 years of careful courtship, the false one weighing his death, and the true one giving him the shawl off her back. He had heard the truth his grand fiancée never meant him to hear, and it had saved his whole life, which he told Beatrice so, sometimes in the firelit evenings, holding her hand as she had once held his, that the luckiest thing that ever befell the Duke of Craymore was a wheel in a rut on the Craymore road, and a broken head, and the good sense, just that once, to lie still and listen.